Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 829. In the SPaMCAST 829, we'll continue to expose the sometimes insidious impact of groupthink. Groupthink can lead a team to accept less challenging work, be misaligned with priorities, or poorly assess urgency and importance. The pressure to conform and maintain agreement can result in suboptimal decision-making, hampering effectiveness. On a lighter note, we'll also have a visit from Susan Parente, who will bring her Not A Scrumdmentalist column to the podcast. In this installment, Susan tackles the need for core hours for teams of all types. This episode is brought to you by Mastering Work Intake by Jeremy Willets and myself. Buy a copy and begin to control the flow of work for your team and organization. Simply put, if you don't control work intake, it controls you. Link in the show notes to buy it from the publisher J. Ross Publishing or Amazon. Remember, Mastering Work Intake by Jeremy Willets and Tom Cagley. The dark side of groupthink on work intake. Groupthink can lead a team to accept less challenging work, be misaligned with priorities, or poorly assess urgency and importance. The pressure to conform and maintain agreement can result in suboptimal decision-making, hampering effectiveness. Problematic impacts include 1. Suppression of innovation and dissenting views. Groupthink can stifle innovation by disrupting psychological safety. Teams at all levels of the organization will avoid raising concerns or suggesting new ideas that conflict with the dominant perspective or leadership's direction when fear is present. This can lead an organization to pursue familiar and safe strategies that limit long-term success. As a result, the organization's ability to adapt and innovate is curtailed. 2. Risk aversion. Groupthink can result in a culture of risk aversion. Teams and organizations may prefer to accept projects or initiatives that align with past success or avoid more innovative or unconventional opportunities. This aversion to risk can limit growth and prevent the organization from exploring bold moves that could lead to significant advantages. 3. Conservative decision-making. Groups of people leveraging groupthink tend to make conservative decisions, relying on familiar approaches. This often leads to pushing forward with failed ideas rather than pivoting quickly when market conditions change or new opportunities arise. As a result, missed opportunities and an ability to adapt to new realities can become common. 4. Overconfidence in strategic choices. Organizations' leaderships may become overconfident in strategic choices due to groupthink. Leadership may convince itself that a chosen path is correct without adequately exploring alternatives or recognizing limitations. Peer pressure is a specialized form of overconfidence. Because everyone is making the same decision, it must be the right course. A form of is-ought problem. Generative AI has this kind of vibe. This overconfidence can lead to the organization doubling down on ideas without fully assessing the risks or required resources, resulting in overcommitment or resource misallocation. 5. Homogenized prioritization. Groupthink can lead to homogenized prioritization, where teams align too closely with consensus views. This can result in innovative, high-impact ideas or products receiving less attention, particularly if they challenge the organization's core beliefs or long-standing processes. As a result, critical initiatives may be sidelined. 6. Neglect of external changes. At an organizational level, groupthink can lead teams and whole organizations to downplay or dismiss external changes, such as market shifts, technological advancements, or competitive threats. By prioritizing internal consensus over adapting to external realities, the organizations risk falling behind in its industry or missing an emerging opportunity. This happened in my first job directly out of college. The organization ignored the fact that the world of retailing had changed, the fact that women didn't like to wear double knit polyester anymore, and very frankly, the firm failed. Cultural reinforcement. Over time, groupthink can become entrenched as part of the culture, reinforcing norms that value agreement over constructive debate. They will affect decision-makings at all levels, creating an environment where critical issues are downplayed to maintain harmony in the organization. 8. Failure to act on urgent issues. Decision-making speed is often negatively impacted as teams fail to act swiftly on urgent issues because they downplay the severity of these situations. This can lead to inertia and delayed decision-making during crises, compounding problems and making recovery more difficult. Groupthink can hinder work intake by suppressing innovation, narrowing decision-making, and promoting risk-averse behavior. In all but the smallest organizations, work intake requires some combination of groupthink and individual leadership. Maximizing the value of both approaches while avoiding the pitfalls is the focus of our third and final, maybe, installment in 2 weeks. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com or call at 440-668-5717. Susan Parente, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Hello, Tom. It's good to hear from you. How have you been?
I am wonderful. It has been a marvelous morning. I've had some really great conversations already this morning. So, yeah, I guess we're sort of nodding and winking toward the fact that we've been talking now for about 40 minutes on this call and recorded a couple. Susan, today, for this conversation, I would like to understand, we live in an interesting world, right? Where maybe if you're, and I'll be controversial this time, maybe if you're lucky, you're co-located and you have a team that actually gets together more than one day a week. But we're in this weird hybrid world. Heck, we've been in the world where teams, and I'll do that air quote thing, teams have been spread across time zones, sometimes 11 or 12 different time zones. Do you think they should have core hours?
Oh, yes, I do. Now, when you're starting
What do you
to
mean
talk
by core
about
hours before we go deep on that one?
Okay, well, I wanted to think about the 11 time zones. Like, that's going to be more challenging, but still, I think there's this importance that there be at least some time when everybody is there at the same time. So core hours basically say, for example, I'll give you an example, like if core hours are 9 to 3, that means I can come in before 9, but I can't leave before 3. Or I can work later, but I must come in by 9, right? So that gives flexibility to people. Not everybody's a super morning person. Some people have things that they do in the morning. Some people go for a 6-mile run. Some people drop off their kids. Some people sleep in. So, and actually, personally, I like this because when I started in the workforce, I was living in the DC area and I had a long commute. And sometimes that commute had a lot of traffic. And sometimes if you would get started just, I don't know, maybe like 5-10 minutes later, you somehow now ended up with like another half hour of traffic. So your 5 or 10 minutes like became much worse.
It was not linear.
No, it's not linear at all. So you're like, oh no. And like, so it was always hey, I have to be at work by 8 or something like that. Well, later on in my career, I started realizing, especially in the DC area, getting in earlier is better. There's like certain roads that are open earlier. You don't have to have high occupancy vehicle before certain hours, right? So I'm not particularly a morning person, but I became a morning person because of my hate of traffic. Um, and then and then on the other side, it was also nice to leave earlier, although it always made me wonder because I would be driving in at like 5:30 or 6, and there wouldn't be very many people. And then I would leave like 8.5 hours later, and there'd be a ton of people. I was like, do these people like not take a lunch? Like, I don't understand. Like, why are you leaving now? Because you didn't come in when I got in. So it's like seemed like everybody would leave work earlier than when they ought to, you know? But anyway, so the core hours allows people to have this flexibility of, I want to go into work early or I want to go into work later. But by having core hours, we can say, oh, okay, let's make sure our team meetings are during these times because these are the times we can pretty much guarantee people will be there. Now, between, let's say, 9 and 3, you also have lunch. Now, I don't know that everybody takes an hour for lunch, but at least a half an hour. Most of the time for me, my lunch involves eating during a meeting where it's okay for me to eat, and using my lunch hour to like go for a workout or go for a walk or something like that. And it's usually not an hour. So that's kind of what I tend to do with lunch, but it is good for people to get up and about in the middle of the day too. So the challenge is when you said 11 time zones, I'm like, ooh, that one's tough. That
But
one's really tough.
that one is fairly typical. That's the difference between East Coast US and India. And
Yeah.
let's face it, I don't know about you, but I don't know how many teams that I've worked with that weren't some combination of, geography wise, US and India. And that's a huge gap. I don't know. Finding somebody gets punished by having
Yeah,
overlap.
and I want to say that sort of in my experience, the Eastern time becomes the snobs. Like we often don't think about people being in other time zones, and then even if we do, the expectation is they accommodate Eastern time. I think there's two reasons for that. These are geographic reasons: New York and DC, right? So due to the United States standing in the world, right? Our nation's capital being on Eastern time probably drives things. New York, from a fashion and culture sense, it has some centristness there, and I think I'm making up a word, but I believe, I mean, even if you talk to people in New York, they're very New York centric, right? They're like, they'll tell you the best Chinese place is within a block of their apartment. The best Italian place is in a block, but in the other direction, right? So it's like, and there's a lot of good food in New York, so they're probably correct that those are way better than all of my options where I live. But I do think there is this sort of Eastern centric kind of view on work. What I will say is I'm right now working on a project with somebody in India, and it's actually wonderful. She's really great. I hadn't talked to her for a few years. I'm doing a course development with her, and her team. And we hadn't talked in a few years, and then we got talking, and we both lost our fathers like within the same year, which was really interesting. So we hadn't talked, and then we started talking. We both lost our fathers, and we both very close to our fathers. So it was a really interesting conversation. And I think after that, we felt even more well related with one another. And it's funny because it is likely that I will never meet her in my lifetime. I'm not planning to go to India. And I did say, if you do come to the US and you're drivable, I will drive to you. I will make that effort. But the way that that's dealt with, to be honest with you, is she compensates for that. So yes, it's pretty much, I get messages from her early in the morning if we meet face to face, and video meeting. It's usually early in the morning, which is in the evening for her. And I said to her, I can accommodate you more, so I can meet you earlier if that's important. And she's like, oh no, don't worry about it. She's like, I operate on more like US time than I do my local time. And I'm used to that because that's how I operate. That's how I work. And she has, I think it's like a family business that they work on. So anyway, but yeah, so I think that's how it ends up getting solved with those time zones. Unfortunately, I think that the Eastern time zone people end up being snobs. So I try not to be that. I try to accommodate the other person. But most of my projects are within the continental US. So you're talking 2 to 3 hours at most. I did have a project where I had somebody who was in California. They definitely started earlier in the morning. I think they actually started work at like 6 o'clock in the morning. So I would never have a team meeting before 9. I try to have it at 9:30, keeping them in mind. And we did also have 4 hours on that contract. And it's actually come up recently because I'm staffing a project or helping to staff a project, a new one where the client is on Mountain Time, but the company's headquarters is on Eastern Time. The company has one other contract, or actually, no, I'll say maybe 2 or 3 other contracts on Mountain Time, but by far most contracts are on Eastern Time. So I don't even think the company's thinking about it. In fact, the other contracts that are on Mountain Time, I think most of the people are located in the Mountain Time, whereas this contract is very large, can have a lot of people on it, and they're located in any time zone in the US because it's all virtually staffing. We're staffing this contract virtually. So it's not just about people on Mountain Time being able to talk to people on Eastern Time, but it's about any time zone that anyone might be in. So I think it's something that's like, oh, that'll work itself out. And I don't think it does work itself out. I really think you need to have a game plan. And yes, you can do kind of what I did in this other project, which is, let's be respectful. John works out in California, so let's make sure we don't have meetings before such and such time. That's kind of how we handled it on this other project, but there were like 16 people on the project. So it was easy to kind of work that way. There were core hours, but it really didn't come up. It wasn't a major issue. Other than one person was often not available in the middle of the day. Like I would call, email, message, and hear nothing for like a few hours. And there was nothing like on their calendar that they were unavailable. And I would later find out, oh, well, it was something with my HOA, like we had to have a meeting or whatever. It's like, okay, fine. Put it on your calendar. Like put it on your calendar so I know you're out. Or send a Teams message real quick to let me know. But to be out of communication in the middle of the day, you're like, who are you working for? When somebody's working for you, we'll go back to the cube time, right? So if we were co-located, everybody's in cubes, I try to call somebody, I can't get a hold of them. I try to message them, I can't get a hold of them. I walk over to their cube and I find out, oh, they're standing there talking to somebody else. Okay, cool, no problem. Hey, can I interrupt for a second? I got a question for you, right? How do I do that today in a virtual world? How do I like jump in and grab the person, even if they're in another conversation? Now, if they're in a conversation on Teams, I can, call them. And even if they're in a meeting, they're going to get like a thing that I'm calling them. But it becomes more difficult as a manager if you need to grab somebody, that is the person you need. And you can't move forward with what you're doing until you talk to them. It's a challenge. And I was talking to my colleague and then I'll pause and let you jump in here, Tom, because there's a lot to say about this. But I was talking to my colleague about this, and she used to be in HR and talent acquisition. And she said, we got to be careful how we deal with all this, because if we don't deal with this well, we're going to ruin it for everybody. and people are going to say, okay, everybody has to be back in the office because this isn't working. Right. So if we don't manage availability and communication virtually, it will become not workable. And then it won't be accepted to work virtually. So that's a concern of hers. She lives in Florida. It's a concern of mine. I live 3 to 4 hours from most of my clients. I'm not driving 3 to 4 hours. So I guess I'll lose that work. I'll try to find other work, but it is unfortunate. I do think it's a real problem that we have to deal with on our agile projects. And, the principles still say face-to-face communication is the best form of communication, but it's not the reality that we're living in. I haven't worked on a team that is co-located doing agile work for years now.
I haven't worked on a team that's totally co-located, whether it's agile, not agile, fragile, or anything, for years. A lot of times they're hybrids.
Yep.
The thing I always wrestle with is, what's the goal? Is the work getting done? Is it that I'm just trying to micromanage people's time, which I really don't want to do? Is it my own insecurity, and is the job getting done?
I have a challenge. You tell me, because I've struggled with the same thing. Like, am I just being like maybe too large and in charge manager? But I have a challenge when I reach out to somebody and hear nothing. And I'm not talking about 15 minutes. I'm talking about hours. I do a lot of different things. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. Like, I could have 6 or 7
We've had
different
that conversation before.
Yeah.
I understand.
I could have 6 or 7 different projects going on at the same time. And when I mean different, I mean none of these people know about each other. They're for different clients. They're completely different projects. And somehow, I'm basically part-time on all of them, sort of thing. And somehow, if somebody reaches out to me, I can be immediately responsive. But yet, I have somebody who's dedicated working on one thing, and I'll reach out to them and not hear back from them for hours. I'm like, how is that possible?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know if either one of those two things are good. I would argue that neither of those two things are good. But the fact that it troubles you and there doesn't seem to be a solution is what I think we need to wrestle with. So why is it that they're gone? And if they're gone, that's one thing. If they're in the state of flow, heads down, doing some real work, because and any interruption is at least a half-hour downtime, even if it's just for a second. Can I bother you for a second? Well, there's, you got to restart and all that. I mean, there's good hard data on that. That's not trivial. But if they're just gone to go to an HOA meeting and you don't know that, and you need them, and I'm sorry, and this, I might bleep this, that sucks. Not to put too fine a point on it. That's bad. If it's their heads down and they're really doing deep work, you really don't want to interrupt them.
Yeah. Well, to me, first of all, I always ask people, like, if there's an emergency, what's the best way to reach you? Is it a Teams message? Is it a text message? I know for me, I always tell people, don't send me an email and think I'm getting that immediately, because that's just,
yeah.
Like, if you're working on
asynchronous.
Yeah, if you're working on 6 projects, like, an email is not the way. Now, if there's an email you want me to see, you do not have to transpose that email to Teams message. You can just say, hey, can you check your email? I'll go in my email and find the email from you, and I will respond to it quickly. Or, if somebody messages me and they say, hey, I want to get a hold of you, I'll reply back, say, I got your message. I'm busy until such and such time. We can talk later. But it doesn't mean that I'm doing work. I could just, like, give them a thumbs up or something, but some type of, I got your communication, and we will get in conversation today. Like, you don't have to wait a day to talk to me. Even if I am busy all day, I will still make time for at least an asynchronous thing. I just, I find there are often things, especially the way that I manage, like, I don't make decisions by myself. I always involve people that I work with because it impacts them and because I don't know everything. So I want to involve the right parties. And so I may be waiting on an important decision because I need to ask a question to somebody or I need a piece of information from them. And so if I don't hear back from them, I'm kind of left, do I make this decision without them that impacts them? Or do I wait to hear from them and maybe take too long to make a decision that needs to be made? Right. And so that's something I grapple with. And, I guess at some point, if someone's out of communication with you, then you have no choice but to
at that point, it's tough noogies, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I literally actually said that to somebody, that because of there was something that happened, I tried to reach them, I couldn't get a hold of them. And literally like 2 days passed of like, well, I'm in meetings and I'm busy and da da da. And like something that was small became much bigger because that's what happens, right? Little frustrating. So then I said, okay, well, let's just have a standing time that we check in with each other every day. And we don't have to talk every day necessarily if there's nothing to talk about, but at least we have that piece of time designated. And then that actually recently became a problem that, well, I'm really busy in the morning and I'm in a different time zone. And that's why I did it. And I was like, well, we picked a time that we both agreed to. So, if Tom, you and I are in different time zones, if I say, hey, let's talk at 9:00, and for you, that's 7:00, and we agree to that time. And then we go to talk at that time and you say, well, it's 7:00 my time. I don't have time for this. And like, I don't know what, like, it doesn't matter to me what time it is. Like, you and I agreed to a time. Unless
I have been in that scenario, and the answer is and maybe when you made the decision, it was the right decision, but you renegotiate at that point. You just don't start blowing people off, and you sure as heck don't whine about it.
So you'll be proud of me. My response to that was, oh, I see that this time no longer works for you. Is there another time that works for you? So that was like, I did not feed into it because it's like, first of all, it's none of my business, like, what a person has going on in their life. Like, all my business is when is a good time for you and I to talk? Like, the rest of it is just noise, right? It's nothing to do with it. There are times that would be unacceptable if they said, well, 9 p.m. your time. I'd be like, no, that does not work for me. It doesn't work for me this Tuesday nor any Tuesday, right? So
I do offer, because since I am up very early in the morning, I do offer, more than occasionally offer people 4:00 in the morning time slots. To be honest with you, very few people ever take me up on it.
Yeah, I won't be taking you up on that time.
That's fair. Susan, so core hours, important?
Yes, I think they're important, especially when you have a virtual team. Even if they're all in the same time zone, I think it's important because we want to give people flexibility. People have things outside of work. They have a life, they have a family, they have obligations or just interests. Like, even if they don't have children, they want to work out in the morning or whatever it is. But the core hours make sure that the right people can be at the meetings that we need to have them at, so we can do work together that we need to do together. And then people have that flexibility of whether they want to start early, leave early, work later, come in later. Like, those things are all available, and they can on a regular basis know I'm not going to have a meeting before 9. And then the only exception to that would be, is I would say, if sometimes a client will call a meeting earlier, and then you got to accommodate that. But at least you can be sure, like, your team members will not be mucking with your schedule every day. And I think that's really important. I mean, I'll tell you what I do with that. Usually my client meetings are not before 9. So what I do then is I offer to people 7:30 to 9 if I have students that want to have a call with me. I have that time open because I know I don't have my clients using that time. And so my schedule's kind of chunked and devoted to different people throughout the day, because when somebody wants to schedule a meeting with me, how do they do that when I have 6 projects I'm working on? Like I don't even have a consolidated calendar with all those things. Long story short, one of my clients' calendars can't be consolidated with my personal calendar except for manually. There's no other way to consolidate it. So yeah, those core hours really, it helps me to be available for the people I'm working with when they need me to be available, or just to be synced on when we're all available. And I don't think it's micromanaging. And you're right, Tom, we do have to kind of put ourselves in check as to, like, you know, what's our gripe about it. And if truly, like, we do need to talk to each other like synchronously on occasion, not always, but so it's important.
Again, I will not argue that point whatsoever. Susan, how would people continue the conversation?
You can find me on LinkedIn under Susan Parente, and it shows up as me being in the DC area. Or you can email me, Parente, Parente, at S as in Sam, the number 3, -TEC, TomEdwardCharlie.com. Susan,
as always, this has been an exhilarating conversation.
Yes, it's been wonderful. And I'd be curious if people have some different thoughts. I'm happy to listen to them, and maybe you can teach me something or give me an idea I don't already have. But we definitely want to keep ourselves in a place where we can work with people virtually, because then we have the opportunity to work with the best people. Really, that's what we want.
People.
Yes, that too.
Super. And hey, that's that idea of, if you have different ideas, let's have that conversation live. We can all get together and have that conversation. That might be fun. So reach out, and I'll get that scheduled.
Yeah.
Until next month?
Yeah, until next month. Thank you. Next month. Oof. August. Yeah, the summer's flying by.
In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 4 of How to Be a Stoic is titled Living According to Nature. Nature is defined as community and the world. In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius stated, "Even chance is not divorced from nature. The laws of nature and physics define what is possible, and we live within those possibilities, those boundaries." There are several ideas in this chapter. I want to highlight 2, beginning with the relationship between nature and community. Link in the show notes to this week's and the 4 previous weeks' entries in the Reread Saturday of How to Be a Stoic by Massimo Pigliucci. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 830, we will feature a conversation with Jeremy Barrio. Jeremy has a new book, Beyond the Framework, Cultivating Agile Growth. The back cover states, "Organizations that fail to embrace agility," and that's a small a agility, my interpretation, "risk fading into obscurity." We will discuss the rationale behind that statement. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?